One of the biggest mistakes I see every year happens right after planting, when people become too eager to help their tomatoes. I used to do exactly the same thing because I thought a young plant needed a little water every day to keep it comfortable. It seemed reasonable at the time, but after a few seasons I started noticing something that bothered me. Some of my tomatoes looked green and healthy for a while, yet when the weather became hot, they suddenly wilted much faster than the stronger plants in the garden. An older gardener finally explained what I was doing wrong. He asked me why I kept putting water right where the roots were already sitting instead of giving them a reason to search deeper. That question changed the way I watered tomatoes forever. When you give a plant a small drink every day, the moisture often stays close to the surface. The roots have little reason to move deeper into the soil, so they remain where the ground dries out first. Then, one hot afternoon comes along, and the plant has very little reserve to depend on. Now, immediately after planting, I prefer one slow, deep watering that settles the soil around the roots and reaches farther down. I do not rush to water again just because the surface looks a little dry. I give the roots time to move into the deeper, cooler soil. This simple habit costs nothing, and it can make the plant much more prepared for the difficult weeks ahead. There is another old habit I use right after that first watering, and it is just as simple. I cover the soil with a layer of clean straw, dry grass that has not been treated with chemicals, or shredded leaves. I learned this from gardeners who rarely bought anything they could make or find themselves. The covering helps slow moisture loss, keeps the soil cooler, and makes it harder for weeds to steal water from the tomato. It also keeps rain from throwing bare soil onto the lower leaves. Most gardeners think of mulch as something they add later when summer becomes hot, but I have found that starting with it at the right time saves work later. And there is one small detail about that mulch that can make the difference between helping your tomato and creating a new problem. So I want to show you exactly how I handle it. I learned another important lesson about tomatoes from an older gardener who never seemed to hurry in his garden. He would plant his tomatoes, water them properly, cover the soil, and then leave them alone for a while. I thought he was being too relaxed because I was used to checking my plants every morning and trying to improve something. But one summer, I noticed that his plants were getting thicker and stronger while mine were growing plenty of leaves but still looked soft and easily stressed. That was when he showed me something simple that I had been ignoring. He said the first days after planting are not the time to push a tomato into fast growth. They are the time to let the roots settle and begin working. He also told me never to judge a tomato only by what I can see above the ground. The leaves may look almost unchanged for several days while something very important is happening underneath. The roots are moving into the surrounding soil and looking for moisture and food. If the soil is kept evenly moist but not constantly soaked, the plant has a chance to build a stronger foundation. If I keep disturbing the soil around it or watering a little every few hours, I am only making the plant depend on me. That old idea stayed with me because it made gardening much simpler. I stopped trying to make my tomatoes grow faster and started trying to make them grow steadily. There is also a small detail about mulch that I learned the hard way. I never pile it directly against the tomato stem. I leave a little open space around the base so the stem stays dry and has good air movement. Then I spread the mulch around the wider root area rather than making a thick, wet pile right against the plant. Straw, dry leaves, or clean grass clippings can do the job without buying another expensive garden product. This keeps the soil from drying too quickly and helps protect the shallow roots while the deeper roots are developing. It also means I do not have to stand outside every evening with a hose. For those of us who have been gardening for many years, that matters. I want a garden that gives me food without turning every summer day into another chore. But there is one thing I do after this that many gardeners are afraid to do because they think it will slow the plant down, when in the right situation it can actually help create a stronger and more productive tomato. There is one more thing I started doing after planting tomatoes that made a bigger difference than I expected, and it has nothing to do with buying another fertilizer or special product. I learned to stop trying to make the plant grow in every direction. Once the tomato has settled into the soil and begins putting on fresh growth, I watch for the small shoots that appear between the main stem and the branches. These little shoots are easy to miss when they are young, but if you leave every one of them alone, the plant can quickly become crowded. I used to think more branches meant more tomatoes, and for a long time I let the plants grow however they wanted. They looked impressive, with plenty of green leaves and new shoots everywhere, but later I noticed something strange. Some of those plants had fewer flowers and the tomatoes took longer to ripen. An older gardener explained it to me in a very simple way. He said that a tomato plant has a limited amount of strength, and if you let every extra shoot become another large branch, the plant has to support all that growth before it can put enough energy into fruit. So now I check my plants every few days once they begin growing strongly. If I am growing a type that benefits from removing side shoots, I take out the small ones while they are still easy to remove. I do not strip the plant bare, and I do not cut everything I see. I simply keep the main structure open enough for sunlight and fresh air to move through it. This also makes it easier for me to see the leaves, flowers, and developing tomatoes, and I can notice a problem before it becomes serious. One thing I never do is make a large number of cuts all at once, especially while the plant is still recovering from being moved into the garden. I give it time first. Strong roots come before heavy pruning. That is another old lesson that saved me from a lot of unnecessary work. The goal is not to make the tomato look perfect. The goal is to help it stay balanced and productive. And there is one final part of this step that most people completely overlook because it seems too ordinary to matter, but once you start doing it, you will understand why I never leave a newly planted tomato without this simple protection. There is one more thing I want you to do after planting that costs nothing and can quietly protect the plant from problems that otherwise show up weeks later. Take a good look at the lowest leaves and ask yourself one simple question. Are any of them touching the soil or hanging so close that rain and watering can splash dirt onto them? If they are, I remove only those leaves that are actually too close to the ground. I do not strip the plant and I do not start cutting everything just because I have a pair of scissors in my hand. This is where many gardeners go too far. They think more pruning must mean more tomatoes, but tomatoes need leaves to make food for the plant and to protect developing fruit from strong sunlight. The old method I learned was much calmer. Keep the ground clean around the stem, remove the leaves that sit right against the soil, and then leave the healthy upper growth alone. Every time rain hits bare soil, small pieces of dirt can splash onto the lower leaves. If those leaves stay wet and dirty, problems can slowly move upward through the plant. I used to spend money on sprays trying to fix problems that I could have reduced simply by keeping the lower part of the plant cleaner. That was an expensive lesson, and it is one I do not want you to repeat. There is another little habit I use at this stage that older gardeners showed me. I put a simple stake or support beside the tomato early, before the plant becomes large and difficult to handle. Then I tie the stem loosely with a soft strip of cloth. I never pull the stem tight because it thickens as it grows. Supporting it early means I do not have to wrestle with a heavy plant later, and the branches stay easier to manage when fruit begins forming. Most people wait until the tomato is already leaning over before they support it, and by then some roots may already have been disturbed and branches can be bent or damaged. I would rather spend 2 minutes now than 20 minutes trying to rescue a plant later. The tomato is now watered deeply, the soil is protected, the lower leaves are kept clean, and the stem has gentle support. But there is still one mistake that can undo all this good work, and it is one that looks like kindness when you first do it. The mistake I was talking about is giving a newly planted tomato too much fertilizer because you want to see it grow quickly. I understand why people do it, because after putting a small plant into the garden, it is tempting to give it something extra and feel that you are helping it get established. I made that mistake for years. I would add fertilizer almost immediately, then wonder why the plant produced plenty of green growth but did not seem to settle properly or produce as much fruit as I expected. What finally changed my thinking was realizing that the first job of a newly planted tomato is not to become a huge plant overnight. Its first job is to recover from being moved and build roots. If I keep pushing the plant with strong feeding before it is settled, I can create more work without getting the result I want. So now I keep things simple after planting. I give the tomato good soil, a deep drink of water and protection from drying out. Then I let it settle before I start regular feeding. This is one of those old garden habits that sounds almost too simple, but it saves money and it saves mistakes. You do not need a shelf full of bottles to get a tomato started. In fact, I would rather spend that money on something useful later in the season. I also watch the plant instead of following a rigid schedule. If the leaves are standing well, the new growth looks healthy, and the soil is holding moisture properly, I do not interfere just because I think I should be doing something. That patience is important. I have learned that gardening gets easier when you stop trying to control every hour of a plant's life. There is another thing I pay attention to during these first days. If the weather turns very hot, I make sure the soil does not swing from completely dry to completely soaked. Tomatoes handle steady conditions much better than constant extremes. This is where the mulch becomes valuable again because it helps keep moisture more even and reduces the amount of water lost from the surface. A tomato that is not constantly fighting heat and dryness can put more of its effort into roots, leaves, flowers, and eventually fruit. And once the plant has made that first strong recovery, there's a simple feeding habit I use that can support steady growth without turning the garden into an expensive project. And this is where the old methods become especially useful. After all these years, I have learned that the strongest tomato plants are usually not the ones that received the most attention. They are the ones that received the right attention at the right time. Right after planting, I want the roots to settle without being disturbed. I want the soil to stay evenly moist, and I want the plant to have enough support to grow without being pushed too hard. I give it one deep watering instead of many small ones. I keep a simple layer of clean mulch around the root area, and I leave some open space around the stem so it stays dry. I watch the lower leaves and remove only the ones touching the soil, then I give the plant gentle support before it becomes heavy. I do not rush into strong fertilizer because I want to see fresh new growth first. That new growth tells me the roots have started working again, and only then do I think about giving the plant extra food. This approach is simple, cheap, and easy to repeat with every tomato in the garden. It also saves me from buying products that I may not need. A bag of clean straw or a few dry leaves can do more for moisture control than another bottle sitting on a shelf. A little patience can do more than a strong feeding applied too early. This is the part of gardening I appreciate more now than I did when I was younger. I no longer feel that I have to interfere with every little change I see. If a tomato droops slightly after transplanting but recovers as the evening cools, I give it time. If the soil surface dries while the deeper soil is still moist, I do not automatically reach for the hose. I check first. Those small habits make the garden easier to manage, and they help the plants become more independent. A few weeks later, when those young tomatoes are standing taller, the stems are thicker, the leaves are healthy, and the first flowers begin appearing, you can see why those first days mattered. The work you did quietly at the beginning is now showing above the soil, and that is the part I enjoy most because the garden starts giving something back. So remember the simple order I follow. Set the roots properly, water deeply, protect the soil, keep the lower part of the plant clean, support it early, and wait before feeding heavily. Do that consistently, and you give your tomatoes a much better chance to become strong, productive plants through the season. And next time you plant tomatoes, watch the first new leaves closely because they can tell you more about the roots than anything else in the garden.